So hello everyone. Hello everyone, and welcome to the last session of the Agentic Research course. This is week 10, and we're going to work on building your own skills, agents, and researcher plugin in a sense. This is our last session, and you will become your own orchestrator. And whenever you need to use a skill, you can use that skill. And whenever you need to improve that skill, you can improve it and make it your own. So as a reminder of the whole coursework that we had, from week 1 to 4, we talked about version control and Git, how Claude Code is not just your own your chat your chat session, and it is an agentic system that writes the code, and you need to control it and you need to ground it. How to do project management, plan, and then create steps and stages for your projects, adding continuous integration and continuous deployment and development, and make it a workflow that everyone can contribute. Either it is you, or even when you are working on a project that mostly a team of members, it could be humans or AI agents are contributing. So then there should be a centralized system of testing the new implementation, so the earlier implementation or the basic tests are not failing. In the week 5 to 9, basically, we implemented the same things that we learned, the same ideas and fundamentals that we learned through week 1 to 4 into literature review, grant proposals, manuscript writing, figures, and then neuroinformatics and exporting our data into brain imaging data structure or bits format. And now we're going to basically move it to the next step or next stage of mastery, that extending these tools to the things that you want and things that are missing or needs to be improved. Basically, every week you run a tool, you run a skill, but we never talked what that tool is or what type that tool is. Today, we're going to talk about the specific types or different types of those tools and why each one is appropriate for a stage that we have, and then you become familiar how to use and extend that as well. So the idea is that on the research skills, or the whole the course that we talked about, we covered, we have about 6 skills. We have 6 tools that they got mixed up during the course. I never tried to describe them in a sense, because if you are doing research, you do not really need to know what you want to have. You can just communicate, use MATLAB, or use a skill, for example, for development of figures or for a paper review. And it doesn't really matter if it's a skill or a plugin or an agent or a hook or whatever, because the agent would understand it anyways, that this is the thing that you want, and it would just appropriate that for you. So these skills have basically 6 words, or they have 6 names. They are not interchangeable. They have different scopes and different ways that are being called and different capabilities. The idea is that you do not probably even need to know the 6, but you need to know the answer of 2 questions. And then when you know that, then ideally, like, the AI agent will understand it and give it to you, give the answer to you, and recall the correct the correct tool to use. Those 2 questions are: who triggers it, and then where does it run? And that's going to be really interesting to talk about. So, for example, if we need a knowledge in the context, so the main chat or the main session runs it, then we call it, and the Claude or the agent triggers it, then we call it a skill. So Claude triggers or invokes a skill, meaning that it opens a file, including many commands and instructions, and reads it to understand a context. If you trigger it, it becomes a command: do that or write this. So it's going to happen in the main chat. But if there's a command or context that is going to happen, and Claude or the agent is going to make it, and but it's going to happen in a separate context. It becomes, we just call it an agent. It is fundamentally the same Claude, but another instance of that, another call with zero knowledge and just a very specific context that was given by the main Claude. Let's call it the main chat. Calls another instance of the agent and gives it a specific context and asks it to run something and then responds back to it with a report. That's called an agent. Sometimes none of these are there. There are some things that are automatic. For example, some event happens like a git commit or a question or an answer or something similar like that. And then an action should happen, and we call it hook. You probably remember the pre-commit hooks that we talked about. It is not even within the chat environment. It is an automation that is built. It can be built within the Claude Code, for example, or Codex or others, or it could be just part of another system, like the Git system that allows pre and post commit hooks. And then there are things that are completely living outside, which is one of them is MCP servers. MCP servers is actually a running server that is instantiated, but it is for communicating with an outside tool, for example, with a API, and which is not actually a good use of MCPs. But anyways, just as an example, if you want to communicate with a knowledge base and that has specific instructions, but that runs by itself, this is an outside tool. You can query it. You can get information from that as well. But here with the MCP server, there are instructions how the LLM and the agent can also talk to it. So the LLM submits its questions to the MCP server and get answers. And if you remember the MATLAB MCP tools that we talked about is that MCP. That's a very good example because many part of the MATLAB MCP tools is not just running a MATLAB file. It is holding the MATLAB workspace, for example, or holding the figures and then inspecting that figure and that workspace or that figure for additional information. These are not trivial tasks that an agent can do in the background. So again, the two questions of who triggers it and where does it run creates this matrix that helps that facilitates or creates the need of these six tools or these six types of tools, and that's how probably we can remember them. So the idea is that just to pivot the whole matrix to understand that when each tool is needed, each type of tool is needed. If you want Claude to follow your procedure for a topic, you use skill, like a skill for the figures, or like the paper writing skills or grants writing skill. If you need a scope of it, you need a scope job with zero knowledge from previous work, then you invoke an agent. One of the things that I thought actually is an improvement to the research skills marketplace is that I changed the review tools that we had for the skills, like the paper review and the grant review and the figure review, which was actually its own agent, but the other ones were skills. But I realized that when it is a skill, the main chat is going to manage it, and the main chat is going to dance around the skill in a sense that because it knows what happened before and how it wrote those papers or sections, then it's not going to do a faithful review. So I changed them to an agent, and now they are agent. So the reviews are agent now. The agent gets the instructions and also gets the paper or gets the grant and tries to review it. So I believe that it's going to become a little more independent and even like harder to pass that, which is a good thing because if you get more reviews, then the main agent or the main chat can essentially iterate and give you a lot more meaningful feedback. If you are doing a command, then if you are just giving it a command, then that's become a command, and that can orchestrate a multi-step workflow. If there is something that you need to happen after each question or before each question or after each commit or before each PR, for example, that is called a hook. And then if you want Claude to reach an external system like a MATLAB session or a database, that's an MCP server. And then when you want Claude to bundle everything like this, then that's called a plugin, and that's the whole advantage. So the plugins are bundles of skills, agents, commands, hooks, and MCP servers optionally, like each of them, all of them can be present, or just like a subset of them, and then you can ship them to others or to your different machines, and you can improve upon. You might want to screenshot this, so you come back to this, and then later on, if you want to use it, you can instruct the agent to create the skill or agent or command for you, or sorry, the hook, or connect an MCP server for you. Okay, so probably like one of the most important questions is what is skill and why it is different from agent. And I think like I just touched on it for the review agent that I mentioned. But that's basically the idea of this slide. So a skill is a knowledge that gets loaded, or unloaded means just it's being read in the main conversation. And then based on those instructions and knowledge, Claude or your agentic coding environment starts acting based on that. But at the same time, there is a whole history before it, or the whole project. It has some advantages. For example, if you have multi-step workflow that a skill is needed for one of the steps, then you can do that. But at the same time, it has another two, and it is usually faster to get the results. But there are two probably more problematic issues here, and those are that your context window gets filled with the new instructions, and second one is that the previous context can influence the new skills. And I mentioned, for example, the review agents, the review skill. If you just keep it as a skill, then the whole writing process will shadow the skill for the review, and then the review becomes softer, for example. But if you basically package the whole skill uh, plus some instructions into an agent, then that becomes its own worker. And like that, well, we had the figure quality assurance uh, agent within the plugin of the figures plugin. So that becomes its own agent. It gets the instructions plus the image, and then it starts its own model, and then reviews, and then it gives you feedback and gives the result back. So the delegation and the results back is something that you're gonna get. It's more independent. It can run in the background. That's one advantage. While you're doing another task, for example, it will not use your main chat conversation context and token size, but nevertheless, it uses some context. It is a little slower because creating an agent and then asking it to report and then getting the report back and then analyzing that report takes some time. But at the same time, for as I said, for an independent review, this is a pretty good way of creating that system. So you need to understand that both of these are triggered by the agent, by Claude, but how this knowledge is being pulled into the main conversation or another environment with its own conversation context probably is one of the most important things that you're going to face, and you're going to decide if you want to use a skill or you want to make it an agent. Also, you can instruct if something is skill, but you want to have it as an agent. For example, for this specific workflow that you have, you can say, hey, use and just instruct it to create an agent or a sub agent that invokes this skill and then runs this task, for example. And then the chances are that exactly that's going to happen without even reading that skill, because the instructions to create this agent is then once it is created, load the skill and then analyze the data that is passed to the system as well. Okay. Now, what is the difference of a skill and an MCP server? For example, for MATLAB, we can have a skill that says, use this MATLAB command line tools to basically write the script, but then use this MATLAB command line tools to run it and to see if there are errors or not. And the idea is that a model context protocol, or an MCP server, provides the tools that the agent do not need to run. It is just an instruction of what each tool does, and then based on that, the agent can basically call the tool or run the tool. The line is very much blurry here, and that's the idea, or that's the dilemma. Well, when to use or design a skill or an MCP, but the rule of thumb is if there is a command line interface or CLI or even an application interface like a API, similar with instructions and help, you do not even need an MCP server. MCP servers are very expensive in a sense that you need a very good instruction and then it's always on. Or right now with the new MCP server requirements, it can be like called on demand, but at the same time it's still like really heavy, and it should be on when it is being called. And turning a server on also takes some time. So the idea is that if it is a CLI that you can use and it has some help, actually create a skill, or even just tell Claude to use this CLI, for example, GitHub CLI or Cloudflare CLI or the Nemar CLI, for example. And because there is help for the CLIs, it just runs the CLI -- help. It learns how to run it, and it will run it very, very fast. But there are things that you cannot run it with as a CLI. For example, if you want to have a persistent MATLAB engine that you run each section, for example, and then you want to keep the workspace and run the next section, that's not a CLI. MATLAB command line does not do that. It just runs one script at a time and then kills the workspace, for example. If you want to use a browser and interact with a web page, you cannot use a CLI because it's a persistent, continuous work to move a mouse, for example, and then click on something, click on an app object, probably take a screenshot or take some information from the browser, and then get a decision and then run again. But that doesn't work with a skill or a CLI. That requires an MCP server. Nevertheless, the idea is that if you have a good step-by-step workflow that the CLI is designed for that, please use the CLI. At most, create a skill for it. The skill means that just the CLI help structured in a well marked down document. But if there are tools outside that needs persistence, needs some other additional things to come together, infrastructure to come together to give you these tools, then you're going to need to have a little more tool base and help with that, and that requires an MCP server. Okay, so the fun part is that in the whole 9 weeks that we had, you almost used all of this before, so it's not something new. The idea is that, like, for example, we used a command which was a specific set of instructions. For example, the epic development is a command. And we asked for this, and epic development is just like, hey, do this, like an orchestration. It's just a shortcut for a longer command, for example, that create issues and sub-issues and so forth, for example, or invoke this skill, for example. So we use commands, we used hooks for pre-commits, for example, and then we use skills like OpenSite, which is OpenSite is a CLI by itself. The skill is just like how to use OpenSite. And then we use the grant writing and manuscript writing skills. Then we use different agents, like the figure quality assurance and the bids-validator agent, to get these reviews. I mentioned that right now the manuscript review, the paper review, and grant review are already a skill, are already an agent, so you can use them as well as an agentic workflow. The writing part is not an agent because that should not be probably a independent adventure. That's why they are just skills. So if you have a literature review, for example, and then comes back, then you just have the skills loaded for grant or manuscript, and then it just uses the literature review, and then starts to write the sections of the grant or the paper. So you can see that while they worked, none of them was magic. They just were designed as a tool that you could use for your workflows, and they might be the best or the most appropriate tool for that workflow at that time. The MATLAB MCP that we use for our MATLAB development, we're running always in the background, and our research skills were there for even the Epic development and for all of these 5 weeks that we worked on as well. Okay, so the idea is that once you have many skills and once you have a probably multiple which comes together as a plugin, for example, the grant plugin or manuscript plugin or figure plugin or project plugin. If you have multiples of these, then you can create a marketplace. And marketplace is really something really trivial, which is just a JSON file within a repository that says that, hey, these are multiple packages that I'm containing, and people can use it, for example. And that's how things gets installed. So the plugins, if you package it in a box, the plugins are the boxes, and the marketplace is the shelf that you put the boxes on. So the plugin.json bundles skills, agents, commands, and hooks. A marketplace basically bundles or lists them for install. As you can see, we created the research skills as a marketplace that holds all 7 plugins. The instructions to create marketplaces is different from each platform to the other to the next. That's why we have on the research skills marketplace instructions and system for Claude Code, Codex, and GitHub Copilot. And that's almost the way that we want to use it here as well. And I'm sorry, and you are more than welcome to fork it and use it for your own research as well, and creating your own skills and adding more plugins and adding more versions. And we're going to talk about that as well. So if you have, for example, forked this plugin, this marketplace, and you want to work on something, that's on creating a new skill or making it newer, I want to say, expanding this this skill that we have. This is how a skill needs to be formatted. If you, for example, have a skill for shot changes and you want to have some analysis for that, you need to create under that skill name, you create a skill.markdown, and it is required, and it has a front matter on top, which is usually like it could be a YAML system, like a snippet, and there is a body as well. I think the YAML snippet is not required either, but it is usually good to have it because it can give instructions when to activate different parts of it. Then there is references. Sometimes like you have some instructions, but if it is long, usually if it is more than 200 or 100 to 200 lines, they instruct you to push most of them to references on the detailed documentations, because then it doesn't need to be loaded every time. If it is needed, it can be multiple files. The agent will go and read it. Then there are scripts that you can run, and these are ideally like shell scripts or Python scripts that are described in the skill.md. For example, if you need to do this analysis and the inputs and outputs are shaped as an array of this dimension, for example, run this script, for example. So that basically is calling that script with the inputs, with the set inputs, and then getting the output. And then there are assets, which is templates, icons, fonts, basically all read in demand. So the idea is that you have a knowledge and you just package it in a way that it only loads the portions that are relevant. And the good thing is that the skill itself gets loaded when it is relevant. But if you make it modular on the subsystems or subsections of the skill itself, those sections also gets only loaded when it is relevant, and that's how you can save your context. Okay. And the whole idea is, as I mentioned, exactly this idea of a progressive disclosure, which MCPs used to not have it, and that's how skills are pretty good. There are different reasons, but one of the reasons is exactly this. For example, there is the idea is that on the metadata on the header, for example, or on the description of the skill, you have a name and a description. It is 100 words. It is always in context. So when a skill is installed, this portion, which is a name and a description of the skill, is in the context, is 100 words. And then you have the skill markdown, which is loaded when it is needed. And it is suggested to be about 1,000 to 2,000 words. And then if more things are needed, then you have references, scripts, and assets that it's going to be loaded. So the idea is that you keep everything in a progressive manner, that it is being loaded or invoked if there are more things needed, and you can just go to anything unlimited as long as basically you categorize them or you make it bite-size packages that can be loaded when it is needed with proper descriptions. So the idea is that make sure that you keep the skill.md very lean, and you let the references and scripts carry the weight. And that's the whole idea of making a very good skill that works on most of the agentic systems. Okay, so on the trigger, so the other thing is how you can trigger a skill or an agent, for example. When you talk about or when you prompt something, when you have the description of for example, the skill, that's really very, very important to have a good description that covers many aspects, or that the user can have or can say something that triggers the skill. Because if you remember, the description of a skill is being loaded into the context, and that's the way that the AI agent decides to use that skill. So if you use that description very, I want to say, smart, then the use of that skill becomes a lot more prominent or relevant when it is needed. For example, for a shot ERP skill, you can say this skill should be used when the user asks to analyze shot changes ERP, or epic around the movie cuts, or shot onset ERP, or something like that. Try to make it as a third person that this skill should be used when, and then exact phrases that you might think that the knowledge that it is inside the skill will help people on that as well. So the idea is that if you have that, then it will fire, for example, when asks to convert to bids, or for example, on the this is the idea for the neuroinformatics skill, to convert to bids or create a bid sidecar or validate bids compliance. Basically, these are the instructions that matches to the neuroinformatics skill. So just because it knows, it has it into its memory. So basically, you will get the skill rightly loaded. But if you make it not specific, for example, this skill provides guidance for figures or use when working with data. This is too vague because it doesn't know what data it's going to use. It never gets matched, and it never gets invoked unless you say, hey, use this skill, and then that's like manual invocation. But the idea is that we hopefully write the skill that the agent can understand it in a way that it will call it automatically whenever needed, and whenever I understand the need space much easier. So remember again, having a third person with a full exact phrases are a pretty good way for running or creating the descriptions for a skill. Having a vague description does not work and will cause for your skill to always get skipped as a result. Okay. So remember, even like for the skill.md, first, you do not need to write these things, but even like the skill instructions. But at the same time, reviewing those are very informative, and even making the review is really good if you happen to go and read the skills.md, for example. So like the idea of the skill.md should not read as that you wrote it for a human and with some suggestive language, like you should do this or consider that or something like that, and adding a lot of pros and background and reasoning. Having some reasoning is pretty good, but at the same time, too much is just like filling up the context with almost jargon and nothing that is really important. So the idea is that you use imperative language of commands. So read this file, keep, and very specific commands that follows one after another. You can see that read the file, keep shot on such rows, epoch around this amount, and you can even have them as curly braces or some uh, uh, or some or square brackets, for example. That helps if you want to have, for example, the epoching change the time with time that is required from an input from the user. But in any ways, you can see that everything is like each line has its own command, and that's how we can keep it really short without much instructions or workflows. Remember that these agents are really not knowledgeable. So even like when you give these instructions, the ideas behind this are understood in any case by the LLM. So a skill is an onboarding for a future agent, not a documentation for a human. Having an imperative voice without duplication and talking about the non-obvious stuff is key. The obvious stuff the LLM already knows. As I mentioned, if a model already knows something, you do not need to include that in the skill, and that's the whole way of writing a skill, to talk about the non-obvious stuff, to talk about your preferences in doing this research, for example. So there is a built-in workflow that is called skill development in Claude Code. I'm going to see if if the license allows that I can build it into the research skills marketplace as well. Very similar to the review. The review PR is also a Claude workflow. I'm going to, again, see if I can make something similar into the research skill. So if you are using Copilot or Codex, you can also use that as well. But the idea for the skill development is a very similar way of a 6-step process that creates the skill for you. So it understands with the examples of the prompts. It plans what files and what things needs to go into the skill documents, scaffolds the whole structure and files, and then writes the descriptions, the skill markdown, and then the references. Then there is a skill reviewer agent to validate. And then based on the validation, it starts to iterate and finds the ways to refine the skill. And then it does this loop that we are familiar in the past 6-7 weeks, probably, on having an agent to review and then going back to iterate based on the review. So the skill development is already in the official plugin plugin. Is an official plugin for Claude Code, so you do not need research skills for that. But at the same time, you might, if it is Codex, if you have Codex, you can go and find it from Anthropic's Claude Code from this one. And then under plugins, hopefully, yes, plugin dev. So it is this one, and you can probably use that. Okay. So once you have that, then you can test if it triggers. For example, you can say analyze the shot change ERP. If the skill is loaded, you're good. But then you can do something to make sure that like a false example to make sure that the skill is not loaded. Not exactly like what is the capital of France, but anything that is similar. Very similarly, if you say that analyze shot changes ERP and the skill is not loaded, it means that the description needs to be corrected as well. One thing to make sure is that you add the plugin already. If you are not installing the whole thing as a marketplace, then you should just basically add it as a you can add it as a plugin dir and give it the path of the plugin. So it just loads the plugin. You can always reload the plugins with a command that is like command reload plugin, like / reload plugin, and that's how the plugins are reloaded to make sure that you have the latest changes that you have and it is working for you. Usually, if the plugin is within the skills, or if you have a skill that is like within your local repository, it's going to work as well, and it's going to be okay. It's going to reload it every time the session is going to go up under your project. Okay, just to understand like how the review is working on the skill set, there is like specific instructions how to review. Basically, if the description would trigger with correct phrases, if the body is lean, if the details are moved into references, and if the writing is in the correct form. So this way, you basically have the right tools, and agent can give you the right feedback to improve your skills that already you have made. This is the idea that we talked about for basically in previous weeks. This is basically the week 10s or this week's defense, a deterministic gate that turns the look fine into passes the review, and then you can actually test that as well. And the agent can also test that in a sub agent, like calling it as a hey, analyze this, and then if the sub agent can trigger the skill, then you can work on it as well. Basically it passes the test as well. Okay. When the skill is not enough, then you know that you need to level up. That means that you need to create a command, for example, that probably like sometimes the descriptions are too specific, that skill is not being invoked. So you need an entry point to the skill, or calling multiple skills, for example. You need sometimes to run the skill within its own environment. That becomes an agent. Or then you need a skill, you need a faster workaround, and it is too much, actually, like there are many deterministic passes. So you use hooks, but or the idea is that you do not have, you need outside tools. So you use MCP servers for that. So however that you need to expand the skill, there is a tool for it. And that's how probably you should start with the skill. But then if you think that it is not enough, you graduate and you go and make it into its own command agent, MCP server, or a hook. So to make the research skills marketplace, to make it your own, the way that you're going to work, remember that it has 7 plugins, and each plugin has several skills, agents, and how to use them, and instructions how to use them as well. They also have some commands as well. Because everything is open, you can actually fork the whole research skill marketplace and make it your own. And that's how I don't think that I can fork my own, but you can try. So if you go to the research skills here, and then basically you can fork and make a copy, and then when it is copied, you can start tweaking it. The idea is that you can, even because it has everything that you have, you can just uninstall the official research skills and you can install your own. The way that you would install, like for example, like my research skills is if you pass the github.com, like pass the repository, even like the neuromechanist, which is research skills, because it knows that it should go to GitHub and see it, or passing the whole URL. But when you make it your own, you just pass your own URL, and then it will pull from that. And that's as easy as it can work. So the idea is that fork it, change the plugins to your own, update the marketplace.json and agents.md, for example, and then it becomes your tools. It doesn't need to be my tools, or even the name can be different as not research skills, it can be something else, and you can just install it very easily. So once you forked it, you can add a skill, you can bump the version of the plugin. Bumping the version is pretty good because when you bump, it triggers or it suggests the agents to update the whole plugin, and that's the way that they understand that, hey, there's a new version of this skill or plugin coming. So they update and they keep themselves updated. So you bump the version, you add it to your own marketplace, and you install it. And that's like as easy as it shows here. It's pretty straightforward. So that's the whole idea. Drop the folder, add the folder, bump the version, add the marketplace, and you're done. You have everything happening there very easily. and a suggestion on how to version stuff, there are different ways that people understand the versioning, but right now for the research skills, this is the way that I do it. When there is a minor, so there are three numbers. One probably is a major. That's like for me right now is 0, and that means that is probably the first iteration. And the minor skill is when a new skill or a new plugin gets added. And then when there is usually actually a new plugin, so it's like if like there is an 8th folder or something like that, then it just goes up. But and like a whole plugin comes in, for example. But if it's just like a new skill or repackaging of the same things and improving upon the previous work, then the version goes up as a patch. That's for the marketplace, but for a plugin, for example, it has its own also version. If you look at here, you can see that, for example, on the research skills, we are at version 0.15.5, but at the same time, for each of these plugins, we have its own version as well. This is also like if a skill is added here, I bump the minor version, but if the instructions or the usually the instructions or some things change as the type. So for example, it was a skill, but now it's an agent, for example, or it was a command, but now it's this agent, for example, or a skill, then that becomes, I just do a patch bump here. And that becomes, for example, on the figures, the version is 0.10.4. So that's how I manage it, but you can do your management however you like. It is always best if you have the instructions for bumping versions somewhere. Usually, like you have, probably if I search for version here, you can see that even like here, you can see that the version bumps are here as well. And you can see instruction that each plugin has independent versioning on its own plugin.json, and then the idea is that a skill has its own version bumps as well. So that's the whole thing. It's very thin here, but which I try to make it thin anyways. But at the same time, we can make it. You can make it like even like more. We can make more instructions as well. Okay. Okay. So before you build, you need to understand a couple of things. You need to make sure that you are not reinventing the wheel. So if there is already a skill here that for this work, you can do like a very simple search, Google, or even like ask your agent to search for you. Just use that. If you need to understand if you need a knowledge, a connection, or an event, for example, that needs to be automated. And you need to know if you're going to reuse it. And sometimes actually the best way for that is to ask an agent to look into your history, because all of the work that we do with these agentic systems actually gets recorded in a JSON file. So you can ask your agent to look in the history and see what tools are being used repeatedly, and then create a skill for that. So if you're going to reuse it, turn it into a skill. Make sure that your skill.md is lean, and make sure that you already test that it triggers. Also, make sure that skills do not have any secrets or data, because the skills will be loaded into agentic systems, and those histories or memories gets recorded. So then your secrets or your data is going to get shared inevitably, like with people or just like at places that you do not know about, and that's a security risk. So make sure that you understand what part of your workflow you're going to reuse. Sometimes you need to break it into multiple skills because you reuse different parts after another, and then you make that to skill. If you do not basically reuse a specific tool or a specific workflow often, you do not need to make it a skill. Okay, so for the demo, we're gonna build a skill that says that uses the skill development for the epoching, but probably not plotting. So I'm going, because like I don't think that I have this already, like on the epoch and plotting, but for the events and epoching, it's actually a pretty good skill. So I'm gonna have that, and then we need to make sure that if it triggers. Okay, congrats for finishing everything and for being on this workflow overall. I'm excited to see like what you're gonna make and how you're gonna use this. From learning how to use version control to now to using the version control to create your own skills. These were really great achievements that you have done, and I hope that you continue learning and you continue your development. You know now you learned when to use each agentic tool and each type of the tool, and hopefully like after some try and error you become master in and you understand exactly what tool is needed when. The idea here is that we're gonna use, and I'm gonna continue the work that we talked about from in week 3 to do this analysis of the HBN shot change, and I'm gonna update you on the Discord how the results are gonna come down. With that, I already updated the skills very much, and I think there might be a skill or an MCP missing, which the MATLAB MCP is not in the research skills, if I remember correctly. So I'm gonna add that as well. And then basically, we're gonna have a full workflow that the research skills can improve, basically can add or can implement. So you started as a tool user, and now you are a tool builder. And I hope that you can use all of these skills to create your own skills and create your own workflows that work for you, and you become the orchestrator of it all. The next is to build a skill for the chore that you do the most, fork the research skills, add it, and if you add it to that and install it for yourself, and if you think others will benefit from that, I would be more than happy that if you create a pull request to add it to the research skills repository so everyone can use it as well. Thanks a lot, and happy coding and happy using the agents. Have a good one.